So let's talk about x and y intercepts today. Now, before we get into how you go about finding x and y intercepts, let's talk about actually what is the x and y intercept. An x and y intercept, if I were to just look at any old graph, let's just draw kind of a rough looking sketch here. The x and y intercept of a graph are these locations right here. Okay, they're where the line crosses the x-axis and the y-axis. Well, it would be helpful for you to understand, if we're going to talk about the x-intercept, so this point right here, it might be helpful to understand if you think about all the points that are on this x-axis, what's the y-coordinate of every single point on this x-axis? Every single one. Okay, it doesn't matter where you're talking about. Well, the y-coordinate of every single point on this x-axis, so every x-intercept, is 0. So in order to find the x-intercept, you are simply going to plug in 0 for y and solve for x. That's it. And the opposite is true for the y-intercept. If we talk about this point right here, okay, what does every single point on this y-axis have in common? Well, every single point on that every single point on that y-axis has the fact that the x-coordinate of those points is 0. So to find the y-intercept, you simply plug in 0 for x and solve for y. And that's really it. It's pretty much as straightforward as that. So for instance, let's take an equation like this, 3x minus y equals 9. And if I asked you to find the x and y intercept, well, if I were going to find the x-intercept, okay, we just said the x-intercept, you'd plug in 0 for y. So I would write it as 3x minus 0 equals 9. So 3x equals 9, divide by 3, x is 3. And now when you're talking about the x-intercept, you can either just leave it as x equals 3, or you can write it as 3, 0. Okay? It doesn't make a difference. Now y-intercept, if we're going to do that, I would plug in 0 for x. So 3 times 0 is 0. So I get negative y equals 9. So y is negative 9. So again, if you're talking about the y-intercept, you can just say y is negative 9. Or you can write it as 0, negative 9. Okay, pretty straightforward. Let's try the next one. If we're going to find the x-intercept. So x-intercept, again, I'd plug in 0 for my y. So I get 6x equals 9. Divide by 6. Reduce that a little bit. I believe it becomes 3 over 2. So my x-intercept is 3 halves. While my y-intercept, I would plug in 0 here. Whoops, pardon me. Let's go back for a second. I didn't notice there's a negative 9, so this actually should be a negative 3 halves. So this becomes negative 3y equals negative 9. Divide by negative 3. So y is 3. So my y-intercept is 3. Pretty easy, pretty straightforward. Lastly, let's just talk about this one. You notice this one is in slope-intercept form already. So let's talk about x-intercept. So I would plug in 0 for y. Now this one, I would add 21 to the other side. So 21 equals 7x. Divide by 7. That's a 1. And so x is 3. So there's my x-intercept. Now the y-intercept, you could plug in 0 for x here. Okay, or you could just realize that since this is in slope-intercept form, this is my slope and this is my y-intercept. So my y-intercept would just be negative 21. Okay, last thing we're going to talk about with x and y intercepts is that sometimes x and y intercepts makes life easy for us to graph. You can graph an equation just by finding the x and y intercepts. For instance, if we have an equation like this, instead of converting it to slope-intercept form, I could just go about finding the x and y-intercept. So let's say, for instance, the x-intercept. To find that, I'd just plug in 0 for y. So x is -4. So I'd go up to my graph and I'd just go over to the x-axis and go to -4 and put a point. And then my y-intercept, I would plug in 0 for y. So y is -4 also. So I'd go down 1, 2, 3, 4. And there you go. There's my 2 points. 2 points make up a line. So I would just draw my line. There you go. So sometimes it's easier. Sometimes people don't like to do that, but you can do it. Let's take a look at this last one here. So again, if I were to go through and find my x-intercept, I would plug in 0 for y. So 3x equals 12. So divide by 3. X is 4. So I'd come up to my graph. 1, 2, 3, 4. My y-intercept, I'd plug in 0 for x. So that goes away. I get 6y equals 12. Divide by 6. Y is 2. So I'd go up 2. And I would then just draw my line. So x and y-intercepts not terribly difficult. To find the x-intercept, remember you plug in 0 for y. And to find the x-intercept, you plug in 0 for x. And finding those shouldn't be terribly difficult, which then allows us to kind of have a nice or an easier way to go about graphing some equations versus the old way of just putting it in slope-intercept form.